All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's WIRSPA Icon Series live stream. This is the 8th entry in the series. Really excited to have you here with us today. As always, we have your host, WIRSPA Community Envoy, Matt Petrick. And joining him today is Anthony Bento, the Managing Director at Antigua Distillery. Matt's going to give you a more extended introduction to Anthony in just a moment. But before we jump in, as always, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co. Just want to point out a few different ways you can interact with each other, with Anthony and Matt throughout the show today. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to just say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from in the world. I know we have people from all over out there, so it's always cool to see where everyone is checking in from. If you have questions at any point during the show, there's a little button at the bottom that says ask a question. So just hit that button and type your question in down there. Matt and I will be keeping an eye out for those throughout the show. And last but not least, feel free to invite anyone you'd like to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes it easy to do that. But Matt, with that out of the way, I'll turn it over to you now.
Yes, thank you, Will. A pleasure to be back with you again. As I've said before, it's just getting to be quite the regular habit. So, as you noted, this is the 8th in the WIRSPA Icon series, and for those who may be turning in for the very first time, what we're doing is this is the 50th anniversary of the founding of the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association. Essentially, it's the Caribbean organization that represents the rum making, basically the independent rum making countries like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, Antigua, St. Lucia, and several others. So in our 50th anniversary, we wanted to go back and talk to the people who've been in the Caribbean rum industry, who are WIRSPA members, and sort of, have them tell their stories, how they joined the rum industry, and give us some important backstory of more recent rum history and what they're doing and what their outlook for the future is. So we've had people like Joy Spence and Evan Brown and Kamal Samaru and Yesu Persaud, some fantastic people that are just a thrill for me to interview and to really sort of learn much more about them and their journey through rum. And today, I'm very excited that we have Anthony Bento, who I first met in St. Lucia at my very first sort of formal WIRSPA event, if you will. Anthony and I, after the day sort of ended, we went out to dinner and just sort of like got to know each other. And I learned all sorts of interesting things about Antigua and distillery. And so I'm excited to be able to have him share more with you here today. So, Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And hello to everyone out there. And greetings from Antigua.
Yeah. And I confess I've yet to make it to Antigua, but having looked through the slide deck and having spoken to you, like I desperately want to go. We are gonna make it, like in if not this year, 2022. We want to come to Antigua. So let's jump right in. So obviously you've been at Antigua Distillers for several decades now, but there was a distillery history before you. So let's sort of set the stage there and sort of tell us about the birth of Antigua Distillery Ltd.
Well, as we were just talking about just before we started, rum has been in the history of Antigua way back to the 1700s. In fact, there's some articles like a book called And a Bottle of Rum, where we were selling over 300,000 gallons of rum way before Jamaica was on the map or anything. Obviously, when those countries came on, we went to the back of the bus. But from that long history of rum, my forefathers, they obviously came to Antigua. The history of the Portuguese in the Caribbean starts as coming to the Caribbean as indentured servants to replace the slaves that were emancipated. And the origins of our company come from that history. So we don't really share a similar history to many of the other distilleries that came from way back, but more towards the point of where slavery had ended and we moved on. The workforce was moved into indentured servants. What happened, the majority of these people, these Portuguese people, came from the island of Madeira. The British thought at the time that there was a sugar industry there, and these guys could cut sugar because they had it. It was a total mess. They couldn't handle the heat. They couldn't handle the sun. And basically what happened was that the estate owners said, well, you reneged on your contract, so you're stuck here. So across the island, there's a lot of these Portuguese people with nothing started. A lot of them ended up in the rum industry, and that's why you see Fernandez and other names across the Caribbean, which are old Portuguese families, got into the liquor business.
Yeah, Fernandez in Trinidad, for example.
Correct. Yes. And Diagua and a few others across the Caribbean. This is the history that we come from. The Antigua Distillery obviously was much later. Our founders were basically rum shop owners. They decided that rum was the way to make money, so they had their own rum shops. They were either buying the rum from the estates or importing the rum from Barbados in barrels and making their own concoctions in the back. And the local people had minimal means, and they used to buy those rums. And that was the birth of the Antigua Distillery, where a bunch of them got together and said, well, why are we doing this? Why don't we have molasses on the island. Why don't we start our own distillery? And in 1932, they put their pieces together. They got money together. They went to the British colonial government at the time and said, well, we would like to put up a distillery. And they said to them, well, no, you're not going to put it in St. John's. You're not going to put it anywhere on the island. You're going to go on a little island called Rat Island, which is not full of rats, as a lot of people think. It's actually, the island is shaped like a rat. And it was us on one side and the lepers on the other side. So that's how the Antigua Distillery started. Years later, as the British were leaving the island, estates became available for purchase. Founders mortgaged themselves to the hilt and bought acreage of lands with a sugar factory that made muscovado molasses. And they figured that was the way they could continually supply their rum industry with molasses, because the whole British plantocracy was falling apart at the time. That lasted until the 1950s, because the machinery they got was circa 1800, 1850 steam stuff they couldn't find parts for. So that all came to a head in the early 50s. And then they continued to buy molasses locally until the entire sugar industry closed in 1972. And from then on, we have been importing molasses.
Okay. So your family was related, or one of these investors or something. Tell us your connection to that.
Yeah, my uncle, my great uncle Quinn Ferrara, he was actually a Ferreira, but obviously when the English got him, they changed his name. You know, the typical thing as you hear in New York and other places, a lot of people's names got changed. Yes, he was my great uncle, and he was one of the founders. My father actually became a shareholder and chairman of the board later on in the 60s. And so, yeah, that's the history. So, yep, that's where my connection is. My
your father wasn't one of the original founders, but he sort of came in later. Okay.
Yeah, he was too young.
Okay. Yeah, so, I was sort of trying to piece that together myself. I was researching a little history, and like I found a picture of like the founders in a book, and I'm like, there's no Bento here, but
no. Yeah, okay. The uncle was Ferrara, Quinn Ferrara.
Okay, good to know.
So that was my connection, my family's connection into it. Okay. You know, very interesting start to the business where you, when they started the distillery, you got your share of the production of rum based on the amount of shares you had in the company. And there was minutes where they actually sat around in boardrooms and divvied up the rum based on how much shares you had. Mm-hmm. And whatever was left was sold to outsiders. And that's kind of how they started the business. There was a bit of a cartel in the beginning. And eventually we formed our own brand called Cavalier in the 40s. And and that's where we started.
Right. So was the distillery's rum popular on the island, or did that have to come later?
Sorry?
When the distillery first started making rum,
Mhm.
was it popular with the locals, or did that sort of have to come later?
Well, I mean, the rum shops continued they had their followings, and they did their own stuff. But eventually, when they decided to launch their first rum, which was Caballero, then became Cavalier, the locals did not take to it. It actually took the American servicemen who were here during World War II to start drinking Cavalier and saying that the rum was good, and then eventually the locals started to take it on. But it's a typical thing, you know. What you have in your backyard cannot be the best. But that's how we started.
Yeah, and I was actually surprised to see how I did not realize that there were American servicemen in Antigua during World War II, and then B, it just sort of I was reading through a book or a thesis, and just sort of how much the Americans coming in sort of like transformed Antiguan society.
Yes, yeah, it did. It did. There's been some presentations at the local museum about that. It's very interesting.
Okay, so we know Antigua Distillery Limited formed during the 1930s or so. Group of shareholders, local Portuguese rum shop owners. They buy a distiller, or they buy molasses, or they buy a sugar factory to supply molasses. That doesn't go so well, but the distillery keeps going.
Yes.
So how do you come into this?
Well, I was actually I went to Canada for my schooling in my formative years, and went on to work in Canada, in Toronto for a while. I was actually working with a when they called me was I was actually working for a little company called New York Life Insurance, and they called me. The chairman at the time, Mr. Paul Ferrara, called me and said, "Well, either someone from your generation shows some interest, or everyone's dying. So you decide what you guys are going to do." Um,
And when was this roughly?
that was about 88, 89.
Okay.
That was around there. And I wasn't sure. I mean, I'm not one of those people that actually had rum in my blood type thing. Um, it came at a much later stage. I mean, I did go around the distillery of my father when he was around and whatnot, but it was not something that was on my radar to go back and work at Antigua Distillery.
It wasn't
I
your
hope I didn't disappoint anybody with that.
yeah.
But yeah, so they called me, and actually I wasn't even sure if I was going to stay. So I asked the New York Life for a 1 year sabbatical, which they gave me because I wasn't sure if I was going to stay.
Mhm.
I came down, and the rum got me. I can't say anything else. I mean, the industry, the whole thing about making something from nothing, and the people you meet along the way has made this my life's passion. So yeah, and then I came down and I understudied the then managing director, Mr. Kent Teixeira, who was a gentleman that was larger than life in my time. Um, they were, very strong-willed people, and I got my training from him, and I eventually took over in '93, late
Okay.
1993. Yeah.
So what were you doing in the sort of like first 4 or 5 years? Just sort of sitting at his elbow, or did you take on smaller
No, no.
projects?
These strong guys don't sit on their elbows. They put you in your place every day, and I tell you, listen, they're looking for that inner strength that you're gonna it's a tough run, manufacturing in the Caribbean, as anyone will tell you.
Mhm.
It's got to come from the gut, um, and that was instilled in with me in day one. I think from day one, uh, he was trying to get rid of me because he wasn't sure if I had the mantle to keep it going. And in the end, it worked out. It was a tough. I can recall that when my cousin Jerry and I started, and we were putting in, Mr. John Doe was down in '91, making some changes to our still, our old Saval still, who had a lot of it had given up the goose.
Mhm.
He came down one day, and there was a gentleman named Mr. Pym who was scratching his head, and all there was coming out of the distill was this green liquid, obviously from the copper. And I'll always remember Mr. Bashir coming down in his shine black shoes and saying, "Mr. Pym, where's my alcohol?" And he started to stutter and stammer. And and he walked off and he said, "Well, I guess there must be a lot of drunk fishes." And that was the end of that. So
I assume
that was the kind of people, we were trained by, inner strength. So,
yeah. So I assume when you say Mr. Pym, I assume that would have been David Pym.
oh yeah, you got the names.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I know. He's been involved with several important Caribbean distilleries over the years. So
yeah. He took over from John Dorr, Simon Dorr. Yeah.
Okay. So so tell us. So what was the state of the distillery in terms of its equipment when you joined versus by the time you took over? There were some substantial overhauls there.
Well, we had a shiny new, well, 2/3 of a shiny new still. The old Saval sections were still there, condensers and the final rectification columns, they were still intact and still working well. So we had a shiny new still, but we didn't have much business. Our export business had gone up and down. We got shafted at the time by a distributor in the UK for a lot of money at the time. So things weren't going so well. And there was some concern about the future, that the company had to go through some sort of change if it was going to survive. And so one of the first things we did was actually to broaden the focus of the company in terms of getting into distribution locally. The reason for that was twofold. If we weren't involved in distribution with the mergers that came on afterwards with all the big, large multinationals, we were going to probably have a hard time putting our rum on shelves and locally. And so we decided, well, we needed to be in the business and take the profits from that to do more at the distillery in terms of exports and product development and that sort of stuff. So the early days were much about me getting my feet wet in terms of the rum industry, not knowing a lot about it, not knowing where the future was, and actually just trying to right the ship, if you want to call it that. And it was only until the end of the 90s when aged rum became a thing, if you want to call it that, that we really found where we wanted our niche. We're a small distillery. We're high cost. We can't be competing with larger distilleries on price, so we had to find something that we could produce good quality spirit and sell it for a fair price in terms and keep the distillery going. So the opportunity for aged rums was like right down the alley there for us.
So what was your distillery's rum lineup at the time? What was it have looked like in 1992, for example?
It was all Cavalier at the time. There was no. They had a 5-year-old aged spirit, aged rum, and we had some different. There was still a lot of rum going to rum shops at the time. I remember we had 2 types of rum, a matured and a sugar white, and people were blending both of them and coming up with their own concoctions. But it was predominantly Cavalier at the time.
So basically, you were not a small distillery, but certainly the biggest or the only one at Antigua, but still primarily making for.
There's actually 2 distilleries now. We have a small gin distillery now.
Okay. I did not know that. I'll find more info on that one. But essentially, you're the small distillery, or a small distillery compared to the larger within the larger context, but basically making rum for the local market. Certainly not the what we know English Harbour and Antigua Distillery as today. So, what was the sort of the genesis of English Harbour? Like, how did that come about?
Well, we had an Italian distributor here. I can't remember the name right now. And he was the one that started asking about aged spirits. And we said, well, okay, we have this. We went into the cellar. We saw the 81 barrels. We saw, all of a sudden we had these barrels, and all of a sudden they had value, which before, they weren't. We didn't really consider them. I mean, they were valuable, but there was no such thing as a product that you could sell that people would pay for the cost of that rum. Putting that rum down, and leaving it to stay that long. So they were kind of tucked away in a corner. I wouldn't use the nice words that the French use, but no, there was none of that. But they were tucked away in a corner, and this gentleman came down and talked about, there's age rum opportunities, and we started playing around in the lab. And there was a rum show in Newfoundland, and we decided to go. And we first had the first batches of trial samples, unlabeled, no labels, no nothing, just the bottles. And we had a stand, and we had Cavalier, but we have this concoction, try it. And everybody, like I found agents for almost every province at that show. And I said, shit, we have something here. And all of a sudden, that's where the 5-year-old started. We went back, we developed packaging and all that sort of stuff. And that's how it started. Just by people in Canada, distributors in Canada saying, I can sell this. This is good. And that's how we started in our age rum thing. And eventually in 2007, we added the 10, and we reformulated the vintage. And what I mean by that is we had a new master blender, and he used various other techniques to actually drive the woodiness off the vintage, so that he could actually see the flavors coming through. It took damn near a year of blending and aeration and blending, not blending, but just aeration. And we launched the 81 vintage as well. And the rest is, I say, history.
Yeah. So 1981 was first around 1997 or so?
Yeah, it was our first attempt. And that was a horrid rum. I got to tell you straight up. It was not really, we didn't know, as I said, in the 90s, we didn't know what to do with these age rums. And obviously the heavy woodiness from the years that they were in the barrels, it was inescapable. So, we didn't really knew what we knew 10 years on, how to really deal with these older rums. As I always say, with marrying, the older the rum is, just like marriage, it takes longer. So,
right. So the 1981, your vintage 1981 was circa 1997, and then the 2005, or I'm sorry, the 5-year was around 2002. And
well, no, there were two vintage 81s. There was the 97 and then the 2007 edition.
Okay. And any good stories behind the English Harbour name besides the obvious?
I mean, the whole story of English Harbour was, it was actually a name that there was, before I came, there were some discussions with a company in the US to produce a spice rum. And through acquisitions, the project never happened, but we had the name, we had everything, and we thought, well, this is the way to go, because it's one of the most prettiest spots of the island. It has a huge rum history. There's the old story that when Nelson left here, he was very sick, and he ordered a keg of rum on board in case he died, so they could pickle him. and he could get back in one piece. So, I mean, there's a whole history of rum and naval history here, and it continues today with modern yachting. So we thought that was the right thing to put together, to use. We started it pretty much from that and change the labels over time. And we kept trying to improve it. I mean, all of these rums that we have we're very careful about the type of rums we put onto this brand. We've launched, I think, a couple of years ago, we launched the cast finishes. And then we launched the Côte Saval, which was a special product. Either you like it or you don't. But what we were trying to capture with that one was the effect of the Saval column with or without wood aging, with minimal wood aging, on what the alcohol or the rum could be on its own by just resting for 10, 12 years. So with very, very minimal interaction with wood. A lot of our things that we come up with is actually mistakes. I mean, to be honest, they put the rum into dead barrels and came out 10 years later without any color. So there you go. So it became a product, So it was just an interesting thing that we thought, a conversation piece we thought that we should launch, and it was very well accepted in Europe as an example of what a Saval column can do without aging, with minimal aging.
Right. So let's jump now to WIRSPA and topics like this, or outside of your distillery, which we'll come back to English Harbour and Antigua in just a bit. But what was your first experience interacting with WIRSPA? Do you have any idea what it was or what it did before arriving? Like, what was your introduction?
Oh boy, I was a young fellow in amidst giants, and that's all I do remember. I was told to go and keep quiet and listen. It was the days of Tommy Gatcliffe, Robert Enriquez, Yisu Prasad, Patrick Mayers, all these, and there was a chap I remember from Puerto Rico, can't remember, from Bacardi. These were the giants. And it was kind of like in those days, well, everything was going fantastic for the rum industry. They were selling all their bulk alcohol. I remember going to events in Miami, and the guys were in the lounge, cigar lounge, with stogies and all of that. I said, boy, life must be good, because they were selling a lot of bulk rum. And there was talk, with the smaller distilleries, that maybe you should shut down because there's no room for you in this market, And stubborn old Portuguese we are. We decided, well, no, we're going to keep at it. And then in 1997, with a stroke of a pen, everything came tumbling down in terms of the bulk rum business.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody all of a sudden was starting to talk about what myself, St. Lucia Distillers, and others have been doing from day one, because we didn't have any large bulk business, which was brands.
Right.
And all of a sudden, brands became important.
Right.
And
so you're talking about, just to interrupt, you're talking about like the effectively the end of the Lomé agreement. Correct. And the 0 for 0 and that kind of things. Right?
Correct. Where the duties on U.S. rum, imported rum into Europe, were zero. Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned St. Lucia Distillers. When we talked before, you mentioned that you became friends with Laurie Bernard. Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, Laurie and I were the two young ones. We came in around at the same time. Obviously, Laurie was a bit older than I was, but we both came in and we saw this whole thing play out. And I remember many times after meetings just going in a corner and saying, well, okay, well, that's where they are and this is where we are. So are we, but I mean, I have to say that the guys, it was never us and them. It was always we. And even though we were the smaller distilleries, you always felt you were part of something. And even though you weren't financially contributing to the levels they were contributing, they took you for the ride. And both Laurie and I, like I say for me, I'm sure for Laurie as well, we learned a hell of a lot. We learned a hell of a lot about opportunities, the threats in international markets. And I think it also educated me in terms of really looking at export markets, that this was possible. This was doable. And I guess gave us the confidence to actually go to places like Canada, go to start to look at producing rums for an export market as opposed to just producing rums locally. So it was a great learning experience for me, and I learned a hell of a lot, and I really prize and respect these guys that came before us. I mean, the challenges are pretty much still there. The only difference with technology is that they're coming a lot faster. But they had their challenges, and I think they left us with an association that was actually very strong, and the ties that bind are still there. We still have to look to the future in terms of there's a lot of larger companies coming in now and buying out distilleries in the Caribbean. And, the landscape is changing, as opposed to, it was 100% Caribbean at the time. So the landscape is changing, but that is expected. Rum, and it is a positive, because when you see large companies actually have an interest in the Caribbean rum industry, it tells you something, that you do have something that people want.
Right. Growing a bigger pie instead of fighting over the small pieces. So yeah, I mean, you brought up an interesting point that the rum industry has changed dramatically over the last 20 years, and that small distilleries like St. Lucia Distillers and like Antigua Distillery, nowadays they're sort of out on the forefront of, like, with the enthusiast movement, and they have premium products, and and they can be getting hundreds of dollars a bottle for these things, and they're sought after and they're collector's items. But that was not really the case 20 years ago. Now, part of what I'd like to think part of that, the ability to premiumize and to upgrade and to become what you've become today, was certainly helped by the Caribbean Rum Sector Program, which was the EU funding, and the Caribbean Rum Sector Program, which was essentially administered by WIRSPA. So, can you share some of the Antigua Distillery projects that benefited from the Caribbean Rum Sector Program?
Well, yeah, by the time the Caribbean Rum Sector project came on, we were already in the marketplace in Europe and whatnot. But the opportunity to actually really make a difference and piggyback and making the whole market of rum grow was the big thing for us. Obviously, you have a very small piece of the pie, but if the pie gets bigger, your piece gets bigger, right?
Right.
In terms of the actual investments we made, we weren't able to capitalize in as much as we would have liked to do. We did get a number of very critical pieces of equipment upgraded and whatnot. Would have liked to have done more, but obviously, you can only go as far as you can with the resources you have.
Right.
But it did make a huge difference to the distillery. It did modernize the distillery and allowed us to be more efficient. And it's one of those projects where you look back and you say, wow, how did they put this together? And it really made a difference for us. I mean, the marketing exposure, which came much later because there was confusion,
right,
was also very important. It
I think actually, the ACR mark, for example.
Yeah, the ACR mark and the marketing around that did help for people to start asking questions, rather positive questions or negative questions. At least there were questions. And where something was silent was now a buzz. And it's something that has really helped the brands that were around at the time that were in the market and were able to capitalize on it. Right. So I mean, kudos to Vaughn and the team and everybody. they made sure they dotted every I and crossed every T, because the Europeans were like, you know, they
Yeah.
they thought this was going to be another African thing where the money would disappear. But the WIRSPA team and the WIRSPA directors at the time insisted that this thing run properly, and that it went through many audits and everything was done above board. And probably a bit too much, but it's not our money. And kudos to the team, who Vaughn and the team that actually at the time really made sure that WIRSPA came up with 5 stars.
Great. Yeah. And so beyond that, and sort of in more recent years, what are some of the other benefits that Antigua and you get from your WIRSPA participation in WIRSPA?
Well, I mean, it's a lot about trade facilitation. I think WIRSPA has now gone back pretty much to what it used to do in terms of trade facilitation and really protecting Caribbean rum. There's lots of people who want to ride on our coattails, and that continues to happen. And WIRSPA is the one out there who's making sure that Caribbean rum maintains its dignity, maintains its following, and maintains what it is to be. I mean, I was talking to some Indians the other day, and they were saying, yeah, we make rum, but in India, if it's Caribbean rum, that's rum, and we have something to protect, and WIRSPA is at the forefront of that. If we don't protect it, it's gone. It'll be gone very quickly.
Right.
And we all have to, as much as we have different views on how to do it, or that we now have larger operations in terms of controlling us, this is something that the Caribbean has and the Caribbean needs to protect.
Right. And I think it's important to realize is that within the rum world, even a company like Appleton, for example, they're still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. And so that, while each producer may recognize the importance of protecting Caribbean rum, from their own perspective, it's vitally important that collectively amplify the voices in unison in that regard, rather than everybody sort of doing their own thing.
Yeah, I mean, wherever we have aligned goals, I mean, we work together, and some of those larger operations, they have clout in areas we don't have. So sometimes, that helps. Those connections help definitely to make WIRSPA's voice even louder, on a European stage and an American stage, wherever the fight is. But the fight is ongoing, and I've heard a lot of things about WIRSPA's this and WIRSPA's that, but to the rum industry in the Caribbean, it is very important. It is very critical. It is part of our lifeline into the future. It always has been since I've been around, and I think it will continue to be. Directors will come and go, and there will be changes in terms of the focus and whatnot, but some form of WIRSPA will always have to be around as long as there's a Caribbean rum industry to protect.
Good. I'm sure Vaughn is glad to hear that.
He knows how I feel.
Yeah, that's good. So
I give him shit when I have to. Don't worry.
There you go. Yeah. So let's go back to Antigua and your story. The last 10 years is sort of has been, from my perspective, when I first really became aware of English Harbour and the brands. How has the distillery changed over the last 10 years or so?
I can say that we're more heavily focused on aged rums. That is where we are. I mean, we're trying to find different ways using techniques, either from the Caribbean or techniques from Europe, to actually come up with different styles. Our spirit, we run a column still, so our spirit, there's not a lot of difference on the alcohol off the still. Yeah, we can play around fermentation and increase the fermentation times, which we're doing to get higher congeners and whatnot. But the focus has really been on the aging in terms of different barrel types, different barrel styles, um, and really trying to zero in on the specific types of wood that do best with our spirit. And that is where I see the focus going forward is for us is basically bringing to market these small bottlings, but something really special that actually, you know, makes keeps the English Harbour brand where we want it, which is up there in terms of respect and whatnot, and being a true Caribbean rum with authenticity. As I always tell my people is that the rum, we have to be true to the rum in that no rum should be bottled until it's ready to be bottled. And sometimes I've been known locally to take 5-year-old off the market because there's a bad batch. And I've been, there's no rum. The distillery ran out of rum. Well, no, the distillery ran out of rum. The distillery didn't run out of rum. It's just the batch was not good enough to go out, and I stopped it. Yes, there's a financial impact to it, but I do feel strongly that we should be really focusing on the best type of aged rums we can produce with the equipment that we have, and that is what our focus has been over the last couple of years, and I'm sure will continue to be. And that's where we are. I mean, we're looking at other things, but I don't want to really talk about them right now.
Yeah.
They're still dreams, but we'll see.
That's a sort of a perfect segue to your story about taking the 5-year off the market. Is perfect segue into. So the next question is: so what part do you play in the day-to-day rum making process? I don't think you'd call yourself the master distiller. Like what do you do? Exactly.
No, I'm not
making the rum.
I'm the jack of all trades and master of none, as we say in the Caribbean. No, I am involved in tasting and working with the master blender on specific products that are dear to my heart: 5-year-old, 10-year-old, gas finishes, those sort of products, those sort of aged spirits. I don't really get involved as much with the Cavalier range. We have a full tasting team that's fully trained, that actually knows what they're doing. We're fully certified by the FSMS and food safety and whatnot. So there's full processes and systems to handle these things. I don't really need to get involved in that, but I do have my few little things that I keep close to, just as a 5-year-old, the 10, my little babies, I call them, the 5 to 10 gas finishes.
Right.
And yes, the new blend we just launched here for the 40th anniversary. That was more Calvert's thing, I will tell you. Calvert championed that one, and everybody knows Calvert Francis. It's only 1,200 bottles. It's only sold locally because it's for our Antigua and Barbuda's 40th anniversary. And again, that was his baby. As I told him, your boat, you sail it. So he did well, and so the product is pretty much sold out for the independents. But
I'm not gonna get one unless they come real quick.
Yeah.
Yes. And as I understand it, like your story also branched out, like you into like bottled water and things like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of as I said earlier on, the diversification of the company in terms of how I look at it, where I stand. Others may disagree, but we all do it for the rum. Everything we do it for the rum. So everything we do on the side goes back in to the distillery and really making better quality rums and that sort of stuff, and actually trying to get our product out in export markets and that sort of stuff. As I always tell people, you can't take profits from 100,000 people and try and think you're going to play in a market of 40 million or 300 million.
Right.
It's got to come from somewhere. So, that's kind of where we go. So yeah, bottled water was just one of those other things that we got into. We got into bottled water because we had to make better quality water for blending, and all of a sudden we got into it because of
Yeah.
Let's try and bottle water because we have
Yeah.
a good quality water. So
seems sort of like opportunistic of like,
yeah.
hey, we need water purifiers. Why don't we use them all the time?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of where it is. Yeah. That was all part of the diversification of the company in the 90s.
Right. So back to rum for a final question before we jump to the audience questions. There's an interesting connection you've told me about between Britain's Royal Navy and the distillery. Fill us in on that.
Yeah. Antigua apparently has there's a retired British naval officer who lives in English Harbour, who has the actual last remaining patent to actually, the Royal Navy taught. He has the actual patent, the final patent that was issued by the Royal Navy. And he has his taught club in English Harbour at 4 p.m. every afternoon. There is a taught. And you'll have captains from different yachts and ex-naval officers from God knows where, Switzerland, America, everywhere else. And it's a ritual where they have a book that's about 6 or 8 inches thick. And it has every day, it has a story of something that happened either in the British or American Navy. And so they go to that day and someone reads out on this day and whatever HMS thing was blown up by the Germans. And then there was a taught and there is a saying and everybody downs it and to Queen and Country. And that's the end of it. So the chap who does that came to us and says, well, I would like my own, if you guys could produce something similar to what we used to use in the Navy. I said, no problem. We can definitely do that. So we were producing all these lovely blends of near 5-year-old smooth. And he kept throwing them out. And I said, well, what do you want? He says, give me there's a product here called Bolando, which was actually the last rum shop rum that was in Antigua, and by good friends of the family, the Barrettos. An interesting story there was that Mr. Barretto wanted to call the thing the Boland's rum because it was from a town called Boland's. Well, by the time it got to town and came back, it became Bolando because they said Barretto and Boland's is Bolando. So the brand became Bolando, a typo. But it was cask rum, unaged, and as rough as you see. And then he said, that's what I want. And so we went back and we produced what he wanted. And he said, that's it. That's what we got in the Royal Navy. Mm-hmm. And it was the harshest stuff you could see, a little caramel for color. But he said, that's what it is. That was what the taught was. It wasn't anything special as people are thinking it is today. It was as harsh as you think it could go. And it had a little bit of color, and that's it. So we produced this rum for him. He has charters of the Tot Club in I believe in Scandinavia and a few other places in the world. But he's an old fella, and he's a lovely older guy who believes strongly in his history and his time as a Royal Navy officer. So it's a great history, and the place they're doing it in English Harbour is just where it should be.
Right. No, I love that story, and especially as somebody who's deeply studied Royal Navy rum myself, I love sort of little side stories like that.
Actually, there was what was the name of that bar in San Francisco? I'm forgetting his name right now.
Smuggler's Cove.
Huh?
Smuggler's Cove.
Smuggler's Cove. Yes, they were down here. They actually went through one of the tots, and they were just amazed. They had a group of them here. We were producing a special rum for them, and they actually were involved in the tot. And Mike actually invited them and allowed him to talk with them, and they thought they were just blown away by it.
Excellent. I'll have to ask Martin about that next time I see him.
Yeah.
So we have some questions here. The first one is from Christoph. He says, Do you think ADL, which is Antigua Distillery Limited, do you think ADL has a specific rum identity in terms of flavor?
Yes, we do. We definitely have. We've inherited a flavor, which tends to be towards spicy notes towards the back, roundness towards the front, and those are the main things that we do. So there is an identity. Should we be limited by that identity? I don't think so. I think that your style is it shouldn't define you 100%. You should stay close to your style, but that's the typical identity that we have right now.
So we're not going to see any high ester unaged English Harbour rums anytime soon.
Oh, you had some medium esters, one from Luca,
yeah,
which we did.
Right.
So it's but the style is still there. You may have. I mean, we're not talking high esters. We're talking 200 to 250 esters.
Right.
There's a chance of higher ester rums, as I said. I mean, we just put in over COVID larger fermentation capacity, which theoretically will allow us to ferment longer. So the alcohol going to distill possibly definitely will have more congeners.
Right.
Question is it the right congeners?
Right.
Is it the right profile?
Sure.
And is it something that you will stand up to aging? Those are questions that still have to be answered.
Right. So our next question is from Dave Russell. He says, in 2007 and before, English Harbour aged rums with oak chips added to the aging barrels. Is that still a practice?
We have stopped recently over the last, I say 2 years. This is something we've done since inception, since I came to the distillery. It was done how I view it. It was done as an insurance policy. Barrels are very expensive where we are.
Mm-hmm.
You want to, some barrels you start with, obviously they're brand new, you're getting the best of them. Other barrels, they get tired over time. And the oak chips were basically an insurance policy to make sure that when you came out on the back end of it, you had something you could be proud of. The process of aging is expensive, and
right.
It's only natural for distillers to try to. You have one shot at it. You can't go back and say,
right.
"Oh, you don't like it." It's not Betty Crocker.
Right.
You've got to try and give your rum the best opportunity it has,
right.
And sometimes you don't have money to be buying new barrels.
Right.
So this is what Portuguese people do. They find ways around it, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is some of the barrels were older, more neutral. You wouldn't get the same sort of extractive aging out of it. So the way to do that is to put in fresh oak chips or charred or oak chip, but sort of give it that extractive aspect of aging.
Yeah. Wasn't done to fool anybody or anything like that. It was just, as I said, an insurance policy.
And it's like, if I remember correctly, it's actually described on your website as well.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question from Eric K of Holmes K. Is the Cour de Naval coming to the U.S. anytime soon?
We are actually going through distribution changes in the U.S. right now with the merger of Southern Glacier in the U.S. that has actually had issues with our long-standing relationships. So we're actually changing all of that. And yes, the Cour de Naval, I think we do have some cases allocated still for that never left, that are still here. Mm-hmm. As soon as we get our distribution arrangement started, resolved, which will be in the next couple of weeks, we're hoping sometime next year you'll see some Cour de Naval. It will be very limited, because the majority of the sorry, that's my phone. Majority of the stock has already been sold in Europe.
Okay.
It didn't do so well in Antigua. That I'll tell you.
Yeah,
They didn't understand it.
Yeah. I need to get there fast if I want some of the 40th anniversary and some of the Cordes involved.
Yeah.
So, next question: Are there any as changes occur within the rum industry? What is the future for ADL? Like, where do you see it going forward?
I mean, I think we're on the right track. I mean, I think we need to stay premium. We need to stay premium, super premium. We can't compete in the bottom end of the market. It's not for us. We just don't have. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't do it. And it's not to say that we want to. We are a high cost producer. There's no two ways about it. Thank God for us that the whole new renaissance and appreciation of small batch aged rums has happened, and I thank all the consumers and rum lovers out there for making this an opportunity. It was almost like a saving grace for smaller distilleries that, hey, we have a chance to actually make it work for us. If it wasn't for the consumers out there who actually started to love aged rums, small batches, peculiar distilleries, authenticity, I don't know if we'd still be. I'd probably be with Tommy Gatcliffe and the guys, and probably, taken up and consumed by a larger distillery.
Okay.
So, kudos to the consumers out there who give us the chance to make it work for us, and that's going to be where the area we want to play in.
Okay. So the last one is not a question, but just a comment from Dave Russell.
Yes.
He says, shout out to Cavalier Francis, who does a great job representing Antigua Distillery Ltd products, and always with a friendly smile.
Yes, he's my good guy. He's my backbone, and I really appreciate it. And him and the team. I mean, the 40th anniversary of our new master blender, John Ferris, who was our cellar master before, did a fantastic job. The whole team. We have a very young, dynamic team. We have a new master distiller, Mr. Sheldon Tucker. Young fellas who are really passionate about rum, and I don't have to fight that battle anymore about passion. They have the passion, and I think it's going to hold well for us to produce some really, really fantastic rums in the future.
Right. Okay. Be sure we didn't get one more while we're in there. Okay. Good. We're done. All right. So Anthony, any last words you want to say before we sign off?
I don't know. I mean, it's been a hell of a ride. I'm saying that like I'm going to be going out very soon, but no, I'm only 59. I'm still holding on for the 60. But it's been a great industry to work in. I can't say I have met the people I've met in the industry, whether on the distribution side or even on the rum side, have been great. I mean, the amount of bad eggs I've met have been few and far between. I think, the passion in the industry, the passion of the consumers, the drive to produce better quality spirits in the Caribbean, the support we get from WIRSPA. I mean, all in all, it bodes well for the industry. And, I hope that the distillery, our distillery, will continue to have a part to play and keep going in this. It's really an exciting time for rum. I've always heard rum's the next big thing, and I'm still waiting on this big thing to happen. But
it's getting there. It's getting there. All you have to do is think about the way it was even 5 years ago. And
true that. That is so true. I mean, and so I do. I think it's been a great ride, and I want to thank WIRSPA for having this Icon series. I know Vaughn had a hell of a time trying to get me on board. I was kind of Demian and Hodgin trying to get out of it. But Vaughn, thank you for you and your team, and to Matt for having us, and have a great afternoon from sunny Antigua and Barbuda.
Yes, right. Well, thank you, Anthony. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And as always, in these things, even I learn a few things. So I'm very happy with that. So, Will, want to take us out?
Yeah, and just want to thank Anthony as well. I'm glad that Vaughn was able to pin you down and talk you into appearing on here, because it was a great session and we had lots of great comments. I think anytime I come across someone who is an English Harbour fan, of which there are many, they always have a really strong passion for the brand. And even Dave Russell was commenting that English Harbour Extra Old, which he says was discontinued years ago, was the epiphany rum that got him into rum in the first place. So I know lots of people out there really enjoyed this. It's a special distillery for many people. But Matt, do you want to share who you have coming up next on this series?
So we have two new things coming up. Next Monday, if my calendar is correct, we're doing another Rum Talk series. We're doing Copal Tree. The posters aren't out there yet, but they will be shortly. But yeah, we're going to be going to Belize and talking with Copal Tree. And then on November 15th, again, assuming my recollection is correct, I'm very excited that we're going to have John Georges of Angostura. He is such a joy to talk to. So I'm very excited about both of these. I think there's some great content coming up here.
Yeah, and I went ahead, I just put a link up underneath the video where you can register for the next Icon Series session with John Georges. So that will be a great one coming up as well. But yeah, with all that said, thank you again, everyone, for coming out today. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing your knowledge and time with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see everyone again soon.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Everybody.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.